ancestors, that I say welcome you to this incredible country of theirs. Enjoy and welcome.
Most of us here tonight know about the Pittwater Council description of the area as a series of villages connected by bush, beach and water. That vision was enshrined in Pittwater's local environment plan, which reflects residents' desire to protect and enhance Pittwater's natural environment and recreation areas, to conserve Pittwater's Aboriginal and European heritage, to minimise risks to the community in areas subject to environmental hazards, including climate change, and to protect and promote the health and well-being of current and future residents. In the same vein, the Pittwater Development Control Plan recognises, and I'm quoting here, any future growth of Pittwater must conserve, protect and enhance the natural environment and beauty of the area. Development will need to be ecologically sustainable and considerate of the natural hazards of the area that have helped to shape the region, which will ensure a safe and good quality of life for the community and future generations. So I think most of us would go along with that and identify with those sorts of sentiments. Now, Pittwater's zonings have been critical to protecting this spectacular and precious area. Large swathes of our suburbs were classified as environmental zones, later redefined by the New South Wales Government as conservation zones. And much of Pittwater's residential areas are currently zoned C4 for environmental living. However, in recent years, we've seen a trend developing of what appears to be developers thumbing their noses at the Pittwater LEP, with a massive loss of trees and mansions built that dominate their blocks. In one case, a resident showed me a property where the removal of 85 trees on a steep block was approved for a single dwelling. Council figures show that since 2018, we've had 19,650 tree removals that were approved through DAs. Now, that was across the Northern Beaches. We haven't been able to get the figures for Pittwater alone. And only about 40% of those are ever replanted, let alone survive to maturity. Many have been lost from endangered ecological communities and are followed by excavations 4 or 5 stories deep, often into cliffs, changing the natural contours of the land, raising all vegetation and changing natural watercourses. Excavations also create huge amounts of spoil removed by battalions of trucks, which travel along narrow roads, blocking them and causing damage to the roads as well. It's hard to believe the final results of these developments comply with Pittwater's 60-40 rule, which limits hard surfaces to 40% of the block that's been built on. Then we have the Northern Beaches current conservation zones review, which was placed on public exhibition last year. In it, staff proposed to downgrade 3,613 properties from conservation zones to residential zones. And that was without saying what sort of residential zones they would be, whether they be R2 or something else. As former Pittwater Councillor Sue Young observed, properties in biodiversity corridors and or with urban tree canopy, those on escarpment lands and major ridge lines, and those on very steep slopes were not rated as of high on environmental value in their own right, so that they did not qualify for conservation zoning. Secondly, we have a local planner who's pointed out that the R zoning is likely to trigger the state housing planning policy. Fortunately, the Pittwater community includes many professionals and highly engaged residents who worked together to develop submissions to the Conservation Zones Review. Council staff have been analysing those submissions, and I believe that before the end of this month they will consult with councillors about the outcomes and let us know what their findings are. Now, as Uncle Neil has also mentioned, there are also development issues at Lizard Rock. And some of that land is actually in the Pittwater area. the land in Duffy's Forest at the old Waratah Park, where Skippy was filmed. So that's actually in the Pittwater area as well now as a result of the council amalgamations. So it's against this background, and with completion of the new Northern Beaches Local Environment Plan due by mid-year, that we are here tonight to discuss what we need to do next to end the destruction of Pittwater's precious environment by the bulldozers and chainsaws.
My name's James. I'm a lawyer. I'm focusing on planning and local government law. I run a practice called Stringback Legal. I also do some work for the Greens, particularly with Greens councillors right across New South Wales. And that's always interesting, dealing with local government, as you know. I don't normally dress like this, but I've been in court today, so I guess it's your lucky day. I've been through the document. It's, I think, 181 pages. I thought it was extremely good. I thought there's obvious a lot of work has gone into that document. A lot of research, a lot of consideration. They took into account lots of former environment zone reviews, which are now called conservation zones, and documented it really well. So lots of good data. But so I don't want to disparage any of the consultants or staff who worked on the report. But the key fact is, you have to ask what the purpose of the report is, right? You have to say why are they doing it and what's it justifying. And I think that's a key issue with it. I know with the northern councils, Byron Bay, Lismore, Tweed and Ballina, when they did the environment zone review up there, it was because rural property owners did not want conservation zones on their land because they felt it would detract, reduce their development value and reduce their ability to do agriculture. So we'll head on. So the first one is that this is a result, of course, of the merged council, Northern Beaches Council, coming out of Pittwater, Warringah and Manly. And the key thing to remember here is there's no legal imperative to make a single unified LEP. So people often think we have to make a harmonious single unified LEP. There's no legal imperative to do that. You go to the next slide. I don't know if you can read that, but there's this assumption, there's a policy, if you like, from the state government that these merged councils will harmonise their planning instruments, harmonise the LEP, harmonise the DCPs. And so we can see, it's really critical, you can see that on the Northern Beaches, and particularly you can see it in the Inner West Council, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. But the key message I want you to take out of this is Northern Beaches Council do not have to do this. This is a choice, a strategic choice that Northern Beaches Council is making. Next. And there, of course, is the three merged councils. You can see, you all know this better than me. But I just thought one of the interesting things about that, where the three LEPs is, there's actually 4 LEPs, right? There's 4 LEPs. You're nodding in the middle there, you know this very well. There's 4 LEPs, and one of them goes back to 2000, right? It's 23 years ago. So who says you've got to have a single LEP? You don't. You make LEPs to suit what your community needs and what your community wants. So one of the documents talks about when you're going through this process, the advice from government to councils is they say you don't have to make one harmonious LEP. You can just get one of your LEPs and expand it to cover the whole area, right? And you can see how that would be easier for a council to do because it's less work, right? So, just supposing there was a proposal to take the Warringah LEP and expand it to cover Pittwater and Manly, what would you end up with? So I just had a look at the Pittwater, the aims and objectives of the Pittwater LEP. You know how words are important. when you're dealing with planning instruments and the law, because they dictate what can happen afterwards. And so the things that I've picked out there, you've got economically, environmentally and socially sustainable. That's good. I'd be happier if it said ecologically sustainable rather than environmentally, but still good. You've got the desired character of Pittwater's localities. That's a plus. You've got something at D there to improve access throughout Pittwater. I think that's really good. You know, that's a reference to diversity of access for people of all abilities. And it's unusual to see that in an LEP, and I think it's just such a good objective to have in your LEP. Of course, it talks about public transport, walking and cycling as well, range of housing, protect and enhance the natural environment. H is important, to conserve European and Aboriginal heritage. Really important. And then at I, of course, we talk about minimising risks and actually mentioning climate change, right? This is the aims and objectives, so this is the framework from which we do everything else. Really important statement. So if we go next, we go to Warringah. So a couple of things I'll just say there. I can't see anything about access. I can't see anything about European or Aboriginal heritage. And I can't see anything about climate change. So if I was picking an LEP for which to take a model from, which one would I pick?
Pittwater.
Yeah, it's easy, isn't it? You would pick Pittwater, right? This is a much better LEP base to start from than something like Warringah's LEP, which is far less sophisticated and far less protective of the environment. So if we go next. The report, I think, is thorough. That's just a little diagram of all the areas that they looked at. Again, I come back to that point of saying, but what was the purpose and what's the criteria that the report used? Next. This one is really important, I think, because this is just from the report and it shows you where their feedback came from. And if you've got a chance to read that report, you'll see that the huge majority of responses have come from Pittwater. So I'm not sure of the relative distribution of your population on the northern beaches, but I always thought Pittwater was kind of the smaller part of the population and Manly and Warringah was slightly bigger. Is that right?
Yes.
But yet you've got a great part of the responses and the community engagement and actually engaging in this planning process. So I think that's important because I've been involved with local government now for 20 years. And what's really kind of apparent to me from a helicopter point of view is that there's 3 places in New South Wales that stick out, where the community is super active. They're just such good advocates for environmental protection and having planning instruments that really suit the local community. And the ones that stand out are Byron Bay. They've just been amazing over 30 years of really active engagement with the local council and their environmental protections. The other 2 that stand out are Pittwater. So before amalgamation, Pittwater, I don't need to tell you this, do I? But Pittwater, it was known throughout New South Wales for just being fierce advocates and fiercely protective of the environment and having the local council put that into planning instruments. And the other one was Leichhardt Council and really to a large extent Marrickville councils, which have now been slotted together into the Inner West Super Council, Merged Council, Mega Council. There are other words that you can use, right? But, so Byron hasn't been amalgamated, but Pittwater and Leichhardt have. And so, for example, it's getting slightly off track, but it's kind of important to the background. I can remember when in Leichhardt used to be the standard that we would all look to say, what has the general manager got to take to the elected councillors and put in front of them in a publicly transparent meeting that all the residents can see, right? Leichhardt had the best standard so that everything was transparent. on Saturday mornings in Leichhardt, Jamie Parker, who was mayor then, is now the member for Balmain, he would lead this whole troop of site inspections, right, to look at DAs, where the councillors would go and look at the DAs, and they would listen to the neighbours, obviously the proponents, but also the neighbours, so that your locally elected councillors made decisions on DAs. Now, of course, in that 2009, I think the Labor Party brought in joint regional planning panels. In 2018, the Liberal Party changed the Act to prohibit any Metropolitan Council plus Warringah making any decisions on, but the elected councillors, I mean, the elected people you elect to make decisions to represent you were taken out of planning, and of course in 2017 lots of councils were merged, and they were merged at the behest of the Property Council of Australia, who wanted to get developments through and did not like well-informed vocal residents groups being able to articulate all of those reasons that the development should be better. Anyway, so that's a tiny bit of history from my perspective, but I thought it was really interesting when I saw this map how much feedback came from Pittwater, because it reflects what I understand Pittwater to be.
Sorry, did you say that law changed so that our elected councillors have been divorced from the planning process?
Yeah. Mark,
Excuse me, could you repeat any questions so we have hear them? please?
so the gentleman here, whose name I don't know, sorry, Peter, has just asked, am I saying that the law was changed to prohibit your elected councillors voting on development applications? And the answer to that is yes. When the amendments to the EPA Act came through on the 1st of March 2018, a certain selection of Metropolitan New South Wales plus Wollongong and now Gosford, the elected councillors are prohibited from determining your DAs. So you have what's called a local planning panel, and they determine DAs.
But are they also divorced from the process of determining what your LEP or your DCP looks
The
like?
councillors are not divorced from the process totally. They're divorced a fair bit. So when the Planning Act was written, the Planning Act was a good act in 1979 when it was written. And it's still in the objective to have a partnership between local government and state government about planning decisions, right? And in those days, you couldn't go ahead and rezone something unless the local council agreed that you could rezone it. So the planning minister had to cooperate with the local council, and the local council couldn't do it unilaterally. They had to have the support of the planning minister. Now, the planning minister, via the gateway, can put a proposal, can approve a proposal, and then declare the rezoning. The councillors will get to vote on it, but the planning minister is the one that makes the decision, regardless of what the councillors say. So hopefully that's helpful.
I just wanted to ask, so we've got two things against us, there's that, and then whatever is on the website, they don't adhere to anyway, because things are getting through on merit and 4.6 and all sorts of things. So we're stuffed.
That's a very gloomy prospect.
It is.
I reckon it's too positive.
Yeah, so does everyone know what 4.6 is? Clause in the LEP that says you make an application to disregard the standards in the LEP and get your development through, which you can, it's usually used for building height and setbacks and things like that. Yes, it is gloomy. So we all have to support better planning where the local community is involved. You constantly hear people saying, we need progress, we need to get development through, we've got to not get in the way of things. But, you know, getting in the way of things usually results in better development. Right? It might take a bit longer, it might annoy the developer, but it usually results in better development.
So James, will you get around to telling us what are the criteria for council to determine that they can exercise 4.6 and override LEPs and DCPs?
That's a complicated question, we're not going there. I'm going to try and finish really quickly. Have we talked about this? Anyway, no we haven't. So that is that is from the report again. It just identifies where all the conservation zones are. Now, the darkest tan colour up on the 10 o'clock, that's obviously mostly national park, and that's okay. But you can see all of the lighter tan around the more urbanised area of Pittwater. What's important about that diagram is it shows how disproportionately affected the Pittwater area is in the previous Pittwater Council area, right? So this is really about Pittwater, even though it's saying it's all of the northern beaches. I don't know if, Miranda, you know this, but I would say this is 80% about Pittwater. So look, in their summary at the start, they've got, you know, what they're proposing in the categories. And you can see C4. C4 is the biggest one, so I kind of just took that as a very quick snapshot. As I said, many of you will know more about this than me. But what bothers me about that diagram is that C4, you're going to have biodiversity corridors and beach, urban tree canopy, escarpment lands, major ridge lines, land with steep slopes. They're being relegated to C4, right? C4 has the least protections of the conservation zones. So it bothers me that those values are being relegated to C4, and I'll tell you why. This is what your current LEP is, right? And so leaving aside clause 4.6, you can rely on your LEP. The Land Environment Court will support your LEP as law. And what's allowed in C4 now? What I want to focus on is number 2, home businesses and home occupations. Okay? So you know what those things are generally. Just remember that. Home businesses and home occupations. You go to the next one. What is proposed, right? And what I want to focus on here is without development consent. So the top line. So this is what you can do without any permission. And you can see this is home-based childcare. That's okay. Home business, home occupations, but home industries. So that's a change. That's what's proposed to come in. So if we go to the next one, and these are just the definitions from the Warringah LEP. The definitions are usually standard. And the thing I want you to focus on is the home industry, which we know will be permissible without consent in the new C4 zones if they are adopted as proposed. Home industry means industrial activity. So it's limited to industrial activity in the home or in an adjacent building. So you can build a workshop. You might think of a panel beater, you might think of a mechanic. There are many things you can think of, and they can have 2 employees coming in daily. So it's bigger than a home business, it's home industry. And down the bottom there, industrial activity, right? So industrial activity, this is the definition and how it applies to home industry, includes storage and transportation associated with the activity. So if someone is arguing to the council, I can do this without consent because it's a home industry, and all of that over there is just the storage for my home industry, they're going to be supported by the LEP, right? Or if you've got trucks coming in, and the trucks need a big turning circle, the transport associated with your home industry is supported. I'm just trying to show you how subtly the C4 zone can change to allow a lot more development activity than is currently allowed in Pittwater. In 2017, you know the old tree protection orders that councils used to have changed. It's now in the set. The vegetation in non-rural areas set. So all councils, this mostly applies to urban coastal councils, all councils have the same tree controls. And the tree controls are relatively standard. So I had a look at it. The DCP here in Pittwater is fine. But of course, the exemptions from the tree controls are clearing is authorised by a DA, which Miranda was talking about earlier, to say that 19,000 trees have been removed by DAs. Yep. And then of course there's authorised by Part 5, which is usually the council or government authorities like school. The Department of Education is a big one when they're building, or RMS doing roads, they can remove trees. And then there's the 1050 code, right? You can remove trees with that. But what I found interesting was I went to look at what policy does Northern Beaches apply when you make a request to remove a tree. Next slide. And this is the fascinating thing. This is their form online. It just says, one of those dot points, applications for removal of significant trees will require an arborist report. Please attach this to the application. So that's it. That's all. I only spend an hour looking, but so maybe there's something else. But the point is, what is the policy of Northern Beaches Council? If you put in an arborist report, do they just say, oh, approved? Do they? Is that what happens? Do they do a calculation to say what's the corridor value of this tree?
There's no ecological value at all.
So this is a problem. One of the things that you could do, like if you knew any councillors, you could ask them to ask. And that's a joke. You could ask them to ask how many trees has Northern Beaches Council authorised under these, not through DAs, but via application to remove. How many have they given approval to, and what were their reasons? Any resident could ask that, and you'd probably be asked to put in a giver application. So put in a giver application. It should all be totally free information. But anyway, that, Miranda, is the sum of my poking around the Northern Beaches Conservation Zones review.
So I have been up and down coastal New South Wales, pretty much down to Bega and Tathra, and then all the way up to Kingscliff, going along meeting with coastal communities who are trying to fight, trying to protect their beautiful coastal bushland, trying to protect all the sleepy little coastal villages we all love so much from these zombie DAs that threaten to clear 10 hectares here, threatened ecological communities, 20 hectares here, 40 hectares here, 100 hectares here, 20, 40, 50, 60, as you go up the coast. Like all those little places like Culburra Beach, Huskisson, Kalala Bay, everywhere that we go into, Southwest Rocks, is being cleared at a rate of knots. Nobody is aware that this is happening. So I've just produced a report called Concreting Our Coast, which documents 20 case studies, and I'm trying to tell everybody that I meet the disaster that is taking place at a state level, not just in Pittwater, which we'll talk about tonight. And the reason is because this Liberal national government has completely given away all the rights of communities to have their say, and now we're in the middle of what is just a horrendous developer-driven planning system. So it's rare for me to kind of read a speech in full, but I want to make sure that I get all of the detail and the information down. So I'm actually going to do that tonight. So let's go. So what we have seen in New South Wales since the election of the Liberal Nationals 12 years ago, and yes, before them Labor, is a planning system that is heavily biased and increasingly so towards developers and away from communities. Areas like Pittwater are incredibly vulnerable, incredibly beautiful, as James was, all the conservation zones, the fact that Pittwater has just been so engaged around environment for so long. But because we're here tonight, we know that time is running out. We're very well aware of that. James has explained how the LEP works, how the planning system locally is set up, but currently it's set up to fail for Pittwater. And this is because of council, well, one reason, the council amalgamations, which remains a key issue. And Greens MPs and councillors have fought amalgamations from the beginning. It's a deeply flawed idea that is at its heart sought to reduce the power of local councils and the voice of the community. In Pittwater, like the Inner West and other areas, you've seen a loss of identity. You're not Pittwater now. You're just part of Northern Beaches. Your council meetings are further away. You have less elected councillors. Thankfully, they're very good, Greens councillor, but you have less elected councillors to advocate on your behalf, and you have to compete with more densely populated areas of the LGA for attention and resources. The Greens will offer all amalgamated councils the choice to demerge. Your choice. Your choice. Amalgamation is responsible responsible for an immediate threat to the beautiful Pittwater, the review of conservation zones in your LEP. Pittwater Council had a much tighter LEP than the rest of the Northern Beaches LGA. The Conservation Zones Review seeks to water down, as we've heard, the environmental protections in your LEP by homogenising legislation across the whole of the Northern Beaches, going from some of the best up here to quite weak protections, really, that apply to completely urbanised areas around Manly. Instead of aiming high, amalgamation has allowed Northern Beaches councils to move to the lowest common denominator. Demands from the state government, egged on by the developer lobby, have forced councils to review their LEPs and to rezone land. This should be done as part of an LGA-wide land use strategy that looks at residential, industrial and employment lands, as well as agriculture, heritage and environmental lands. It shouldn't focus on a single zoning class. And when it comes to environmental land, it shouldn't seek to downgrade protections, for goodness sake, from conservation land to residential zones, which is what's proposed for around 3,600 sites here. Lots of Pittwater's biodiversity is living in people's backyards, reliant on these conservation zone protections. The shift to residential zoning, even low-density PC2 zones, means that biodiversity protections will be lost. Land will be cleared for more and larger houses, asset protection zones for fire safety, and simply because people can. Habitat will become lawns, sheds, and swimming pools. The corridors that connect habitat will be lost. And under the legislation passed by the Coalition Government 5 years ago, loss of connectivity means even greater loss of biodiversity protections. This is a law that was passed 5 years ago that basically protected corridors, and if it's not corridors, it's up for grabs. And even then, to be honest, what I've seen, corridors are up for grabs as well. In a system designed for developers, our precious natural environment doesn't stand a chance. Your Greens councillors are fighting these changes, and we will make a state issue of this as well. We're already doing so, as I've said, with the Concreting Our Coast report. Once these areas and this habitat are gone, they will be gone forever, ever. The other big problem with the planning system for Sydney councils is the removal of planning powers from elected councillors. 5 years ago, the state government decided, as James has talked about, that metropolitan councils, including those in Northern Beaches, should not be allowed to determine development applications. An absolutely horrendous decision that the Greens fully oppose. We will have a plan that we will announce in the coming weeks that will give communities back their power, that will give councils back their power, obviously with all the checks and balances in place, including that councillors cannot be on council if they have real estate interests, if they have developer interests. We have to get that out of council, and we need to restore the power to councillors, the power to community, while removing the ability for vested interests to influence those decisions. So, council staff, council staff make most of the decisions, and a 4-person planning panel now determines anything complex or controversial. The panel is appointed from a list supplied by the state government and contains one local person. None of these people are elected, the community doesn't know who they are, and you can't approach them. So it's a far cry from the days when your elected councillors made these decisions and you didn't like it, you could bail them up at the post office and the decision could be rescinded and a better outcome sought. Under the planning panel system, there is no ability for council to question or overturn a decision. Council cannot move a rescission motion if the panel makes an error or just makes a decision that is clearly not in the community's interest. The community cannot sack the panel at the next election. They weren't elected and you don't know who they are. Discussions on changes in zonings are held in private, and you have no ability to address the panel and let them know what you want. And to top it all off, you pay for it. Ratepayers pay for this loss of democratic decision making. Planning panels cost councils tens of thousands of dollars each year. Unelected, unaccountable, entirely lacking in transparency and open decision making, and completely untouchable. It's actually staggering that we have moved in this open democratic system we have, that planning panels exist the way they exist. Of course, as James has explained, the Property Council loves it because they wanted it and they got it. And neither Labor or the LNP have any plans to change it. And I don't think in the next 6 weeks, even though development is such a big issue everywhere we're going, I haven't heard boo from Labor on this, because we all remember 16 years of Labor and what they were like for 12 years of Liberal Nationals. And there's a decent, we're not in a very electorate that loves Labor. There's a lot of people that are thinking, the Liberal Nationals have had their time. Let's see what Labor can do. It's like all I can think about are those 16 years, and I can't how much they changed those. So the Greens will hand back planning powers to councillors. Pittwater is also under threat from increasing urban sprawl, and rezoning will exacerbate this problem. It's madness, really. I know it's spectacularly beautiful up here, but it's not at all suited to urban development. This endless push out into the peri-urban areas of Sydney has to stop. The Greens have a plan to make peri-urban development far less attractive to developers. We've got a plan that we're actually releasing in the next couple of days, so you're getting a sneak peek tonight, which is basically to make developers pay their fair share by introducing a 75% developer tax on rezoning profits. So right now it's 0. Right, so developers are basically land banking everywhere, and they're making millions and millions, and goodness knows, hello, ICAC corruption, everything involved with that. We don't tax them anything from this. So 75% tax on profits. It's been worked out that the ACT government does it. The ACT government has a tax. We've got Greens, Labor government in the ACT. They've got a tax on developer rezoning profits. We plan to do the same, because this will encourage developers to intensify existing development instead of creating new urban sprawl, discourage them from engaging in property speculation, since the windfall gains from land rezoning would be properly taxed, and ensure the money raised is used for local infrastructure. So said in terms of the ACT, it raises millions in the ACT for infrastructure, and it puts the profits gained from a once-in-a-generation rezoning, right? Once it's rezoned, it can't kind of come back into the public's hands where it belongs. It also makes lobbying for the upzoning of conservation land to residential land far less profitable. So you kind of don't get that as much. So let's have a look at some of the other issues, though, that make Pittwater vulnerable under this state government. Biodiversity offsets, lack of koala protection, and anti-protest laws. I've got to mention those as well. So the Greens will work to overturn the dreadful biodiversity offsets policy that exists in New South Wales. So biodiversity offsets are being used in Pittwater to supposedly offset the damage caused by clearing and development. Your threatening developer buys up a bit of land that they know has threatened species on it and endangered ecological communities. They generously offer to pay for the protection of another bit of land, which may not have the same species on it, is probably miles away, maybe in really poor condition, and not often in need of protection, because they're even offsetting land that isn't vulnerable to clearing and is even public land already. They're offsetting. So in no danger whatsoever of being cleared. We're facing an extinction crisis, and this government is knowingly contributing to it by saying that its biodiversity offsets policy is good for conservation. The New South Wales Auditor General found that the system is fundamentally flawed, and my Greens colleague in the upper house, Sue Higginson, former CEO of the Environmental Defenders Office, she finished an inquiry that I started as chair. We swapped kind of thing, and into biodiversity offsets, and she calls it a catastrophic cost for nature, the entire thing. So 18 threatened and endangered species and ecological communities have no possibility of offset. Still, the Liberal National Government continues this devastating policy. We will stop it. The biodiversity offset scheme is a complete disaster. Now for koalas. So in Pittwater, you know exactly what poor subdivision and lack of protection does to koalas. You witnessed it firsthand at Avalon when habitat was cleared for a nursing home expansion. I understand. So here in New South Wales, I chaired an inquiry into koalas, the one that reported in 2020, which made international headlines, which found that if the government does not immediately address all threats, including stopping, most importantly, stopping the clearing of any further habitat, koalas will become extinct in New South Wales before 2050. That was the headline. We had to call it because it's true, and every single government report that came out basically wasn't saying what we needed to do, and that was to stop clearing habitat. If we can't stop clearing the habitat, koalas become extinct. You know that because you've seen it in this area. So we need to be putting in place more protections for koalas here in Pittwater. You know, who knows? Like with koalas kind of migrating because of climate, maybe Pittwater at some stage may actually become a little bit more of koala habitat because koalas are moving through the landscape as well. So I think you know, we need to be looking at what we can do, not just of course for koalas. The reason why we're focusing on koalas is because everybody loves them, but they represent habitat and they represent threatened species habitat. Like even Rob Stokes said in Northern Beaches Advocate that it is simply not possible to support koala populations without identifying and protecting the habitats in which they live. But that's Rob Stokes, former planning minister. So simply not possible to support koala populations. So that's what he's been doing right across when he was planning minister, approving developments that, and his department that were destroying koala habitat. So I also know that there were quite a few people here when the government tried to put forward this legislation that was going, we called it koala killing legislation because it really was, it was going to be horrendous. There was quite a few people in the Northern Beaches that staged actions, that protested. I know that some of you protest, for example, at bushland blocks that are in danger of clearing. For us, protest is important. Often it's the last resort. Often, you know, everybody has put their submissions in, written to their local MPs, visited their local MPs, hassled their local MPs, hassled the government, written letters to the editor, handed out street, flyers, had public meetings and everything, and they still go in to bulldoze endangered ecological communities, right? And so people are saying we're putting our bodies on the line. We're going to do this in a really, really peaceful way because this block, this beautiful endangered ecological community is so important to us. We've never done it before. I'm going to do it for this, right? It's happening all across New South Wales. Well, your capacity to protest on the streets and to protest bushland sites is at risk because of the anti-protest laws that the state government introduced last year. These draconian laws were rammed through the New South Wales Parliament in the kind of middle of the night, so to speak. We tried to kind of delay it, we tried to stop it, and of course we didn't have the numbers because Labor supported it. So now people in New South Wales, this is a really important thing, they're not permitted to protest unless they are protesting at a state-sanctioned place on a state-sanctioned topic with the prior permission of the state. That's actually what we're dealing with now. This is staggering. It's a law designed to silence and jail the government's opponents. So it's deeply undemocratic. It came about as a result of climate protesters, and it's at a time when we know, I assume most people in this room are very aware of the climate science and where we're heading. And at a time where I understand why people are getting incredibly angry and, you know, tying themselves to things and blocking traffic, I absolutely understand that because they have no future. They have no future. So right now, these anti-protest laws are stopping people, just any people kind of protesting at the drop of a hat if it's not state-sanctioned, if it's not approved, it can be taken away, you can cop massive fines, it can be dragged before the courts and you can end up in jail. That's actually what's happening now. So just wanting to let you know that this is a priority as well for us. We'll be going into the Parliament, moving to and speaking with whoever wins the next government to try and overturn these horrendous laws because they really, really do matter. And it is that awful kind of slippery slope. Once laws like this are in place, it's just kind of tightening, you know, every couple of years what they then do. And it is rarely the case that they're weakened or relaxed, should we say, and made more sensible. Finally, I just wanted to talk about the election, this election, which is incredibly important. So, in the upper house, we've got a really great opportunity to continue to have what is the Greens in the balance of power. So we've had this last 4 years, the Greens have been in a position where we've been incredibly influential in the upper house. I've chaired and so has David Shoebridge before me, being chair of the Public Accountability Committee. That committee was the one that uncovered the horrendous Stronger Communities grants, rorts, $252 million, 95% of which went to coalition-held seats. The very same grants that brought down Premier, the clay target grant in Wagga. We just saw today in the news that John Barilaro, 95% of the bushfire recovery funds went to coalition-held seats. Right, so that's just happened, and I also chaired that inquiry into John Barilaro and that trade saga. We have managed to get countless documents released via the upper house. So when you're talking about gibbers and everything else, our role in the upper house has been to create greater transparency, uncover a lot of what the government's doing. We need to maintain that balance of power in the upper house. We are in danger this election. Mark Latham and Pauline Hanson's One Nation party is out there in force trying to basically get enough votes so they become a bloc in the upper house to counter the Greens in the upper house so that they basically have the numbers. I've got this call flute here, this poster here, which has our team, our upper house team. So I'm the lead candidate. The second one's Dr. Amanda Conn, wonderful regional doctor from Albury, and the third is Linda June Coe, who's a First Nations educator and activist, proud Wiradjuri and Budu Island woman. If we get the same amount of votes that we got in the federal election, we've got to try a little bit harder. If we get the same amount of support, we've got a really good chance of electing a First Nations woman to the upper house. We don't have any First Nations representation in the New South Wales upper house. So we're pulling out all stops. Here in Pittwater, we've also got a fabulous candidate in Hillary Green. There's Wakehurst as well, Ethan Haranjak, which is, I hope I got Ethan's surname right. So we need, as I didn't, because people laugh, we need as much help as possible in this electorate and wherever you live, if you've travelled, over the next few weeks and on election day. Because we need to start booths, we need people to kind of talk about what the Greens have to offer, and I know you've come to hear about planning, but I'm going to stand here and just do a couple more minutes of this, because when you wake up like the day after the election, who knows what the government's going to be, right? And it's going to be, what we're hearing is it's going to be very, very close. And so you kind of want the Greens there trying to help form a government instead of One Nation and the Shooters Party, because that's who it will be on the other side trying to form a government. And let's say we do get a Labor government, right? Let's say it is a Labor government. Remember their 16 years. Remember all the developers who were just so in bed with the surrenders and the coal and gas companies. We haven't even talked about that, but I won't go on about that. They will be, and the gambling industry, I do a lot on pokies at the moment, and the gambling industry, they will be in their ears like you would not believe. They already are. So you want the Greens, and you want as many Greens as possible on the other side to make sure that Labor, if it is a Labor government, is being dragged to the side of the community and the public interest. And they will only do that with all Greens in there. They will only do that. So remember, you've got 2 votes. Your lower house vote is incredibly important. Your upper house vote in this electorate and electorates around the Northern Beaches is even more so. And I apologise to Ethan and other lower house candidates who are here, but that is true. You have 2 votes. Go Greens in both houses. I will love you forever if you do that. But remember, vote 1 Greens in the upper house, and Lani is at the door. So Lani is a fabulous Greens member who is pulling together all of our volunteers and everybody for polling day, and over the next few weeks, letterboxing. Some people just like letterboxing, they go for their walk and they letterbox, and they are incredibly valuable. Lani will take down our volunteers' names and get in touch with you if you wanted to sign up. If you haven't, that would be awesome. So we have time for, I understand, lots more presentations and conversations, but looking forward to a discussion and answering questions. Thanks for listening.
Good evening. I think this has been a very interesting meeting. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about the law, and we've learned a lot from Cate. This is a political issue, and we have to be talking to all political parties the Greens, the Labor, Liberal and the Independents. It's going to come down to politics. I'm talking as the President of the Palm Beach and Wild Beach Association. We have been protecting Palm Beach for 103 years, which is quite unique for a community group. I think we have done a very good job when you look at Palm Beach and Wild Beach. Low rise, no high rise. Look at, we have the beaches, we have Pittwater, and we have Barrenjoey. But we're finding we have to continually defend our position. We're now defending our position as far as Barrenjoey goes. They want to commercialise Barrenjoey. The politicians and the bureaucrats think they can take over. I can assure you we're going to stop them commercialising. Barrenjoey is unique. It's the crown in Pittwater, and we're going to stop them commercialising it. And we want your support. As I said, we have protected the environment for over 100 years, but it's becoming more and more difficult. The council is continually passing, it says modest houses in Palm Beach. The council is continuously passing DAs with multiple non-compliances on height, bulk. Our whole sites are taken up. Setbacks, once again, no setbacks, no trees. The major excavations, we have the quarries down at Palm Beach, in Ocean Road. Whale Beach has turned into a disaster because of the properties in Whale Beach. Massive properties are being approved based on merit. Whose merit? Merit for who? We don't know. We're not told. As Miranda said, the whole of Palm Beach used to be an environmental zone. But there are 1,500 houses in Palm Beach and Wild Beach. It's only a small area. 25% are going to become C3 zones, which is more stringent than the C4s. It's named the foreshore properties. Why? We have no idea. Why are they going to be different? Why is there C3 and C4? We have absolutely no idea. 25% are becoming residential. Why? We have no idea once again. They haven't defined residential. They haven't told us what they mean by residential. What does it mean? To be transparent, that when they finally define residential, they need to go back and start the consultation all over again. How the hell can you be expected to comment on a document when they don't even define some of the major criteria? It's all based on criteria, fire, etc., etc. However, these are flawed. It's inconsistent. There are houses in the one street next to each other with different zones. Why? Why is one side of the street residential and the other side conservation? I don't know. They need to rejig the criteria and start all over again. And we've told the councillor, we have met on a number of occasions with the council officials and with our local member. The council officials seem to be more content with keeping the bureaucrats in the Department of Planning happy than listening to what their resident groups are saying. They keep telling us that the whole of the Northern Beaches area needs to have the one LEPs, but we've been told tonight there is no legal requirement for it to be all the same. Why are they pulling the wool over our eyes? Does anybody know? No. So, let me finish by saying that it is political. We have to raise the act. We have to be talking to all the political parties, as we cannot let them go ahead and destroy the Pittwater. Pittwater is unique in Sydney, and it is unique in the world. Overseas visitors come to visit, and 250,000 people, mostly overseas visitors, climb Barrenjoey every year. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's Peter Blanchard. I'm the president of Bayview Church Point Residents Association, another jewel in the crown of Pittwater. So we've lived here now, my wife and I, for some 20 years, and been fairly active around trying to preserve the integrity of the area at an individual level, as well as obviously getting involved in our own community association and trying to get some energy going. And that's probably the biggest challenge that faces a lot of us. There's a very small proportion of people in this room. We're pretty much all converts, clearly, and really we're not the ones that need to hear these messages. It's good to hear it, it's firming up, it's reassuring, but somehow we've got to interpret that or extrapolate it out to the greater population. And of course that's the target group in our case that live in Bayview and Church Point. We've got some pretty sombre examples in our part of the world, and in fact across the road from where I live, and so if my wife and I got caught short on it, then how the hell do other people keep up with it? We almost woke up one day to find that 7 blocks of land in a row had been put on the market by Roads and Maritime. In fairness, they were zoned for development 40 or 50 years ago. Wayne Dorman, deforestation on those 7 blocks. There's virtually been raised to the notice at all that this was going to happen. This was an issue we took up with our local member Rob Stokes in terms of it being his government, of course, that was responsible for freeing up this land, obviously requiring its public utilities to find budget in some way, and they look around and they find some land and there's a way of making some money. And so the two questions that we addressed to Rob Stokes at the time was, one, what did you know about this, Rob, going on? And he was, to my impression and the people that were in the meeting with us at the time, he was genuinely surprised to find out that it had happened. In other words, he wasn't aware that one of his fellow ministers was making a few quid on the side selling off a tranche of 7 blocks of land. So the next question was, could he please undertake within his government instrumentality to find out what other land across the whole of the Northern Beaches Council was government owned that in fact might be being coveted by various government departments for development, so that at least the community could know where the public lands were and what the possible risks were. As I say, we almost literally woke up one day to find 4 sale signs on the 7 blocks of land, unbelievably, and then the DAs have started. Now, 3 DAs have gone through on those 7 blocks at this point in time, and the removal of the old growth forest and the undergrowth, as I say, abutting a virtual rainforest, has started. We had some heavy rainfall here in the last couple of days, and it's very typical there that these slopes, I'm talking about the gradient, I'm sorry I can't tell you the scientific gradient, but very steep blocks of ground, and soil, of course, at the moment, because it's bare earth, is running down onto the road. It's running down the road, it crosses the road, and then it runs into the creek. And I'd been away for a few days and came back and saw this sort of colour in the creek, and I thought, oh, we've got some sort of bloom, some sort of growth in the creek. But no, it's actually from across the road, down the road, over the bank of the creek, into the creek, and running down the Korzy Creek. Now, these are anecdotes, of course, but the other question, when we saw that the 3rd block that was going up for development, which is a small block of some 500 square metres, a bit more, that they virtually wanted to take every tree off the block. And so we put in, along with other community members around there, not too many of us, but a few, put in appeals to council, requested council to know what the position was on it. And of course we're invited to address the planning committee when the DA was being considered. We think that's okay, that's consultation, that's involvement. And so my wife and I, representing different associations, if you like, did a virtual dial into that committee. We were heard, of course. My question in particular was, is anybody in council or at any level, anywhere, oversighting the fact that this is 7 blocks, not 1 block, but 7 blocks. Is anybody actually looking at the cumulative impact of clear levelling 7 blocks, not just the 1 block? They couldn't answer that. It wasn't within their sort of purview to answer that question. And so we just put forward our argument of concern. The answer that we got back, well, we didn't get an answer back other than the DA was approved, and we discovered that, some days later. But the 2 professional people that were employed by the owner, if you like, of the block of land, put the relevant application in, came up with 2 rationales for why they needed to take these trees out. One was that they actually had advice from the local bushfire brigade that said that basically if they got rid of the bush there, and I'm paraphrasing it a bit cruelly, but basically get rid of the trees, you don't have a fire risk, or you minimise the fire risk. So that was the first one. The second one was more dealing with the aesthetics and pointed out that because it was adjoining a national park full of trees, it really wasn't such an issue. Now, in a very blunt way, if you take that in its literal form, knock the trees down and reduce your fire risk, and if you're somewhere where you can see other trees, you don't need to worry about the ones that are on your block. Now, you have to laugh, but we were crying about it almost, because, of course, at the end of the day, as I say, these blocks are being clear-felled. Now, this is happening on this council's watch, it's happening on this state minister's watch, and they, of course, don't appear to have any great input into it. So, I suppose from our point of view, from a residents' association, and that's just one example, as I say, and it's immediately adjacent, but we still don't know the answer to what else is going on in Church Point and Bayview, what other lands are available, and what sort of developments will go on. I don't want to hold things up a bit, but I'd go a little bit further and say that we also but of equal concern, we talk about developers as though they are a particular set aside, but in fact the developers, of course, all relate back to us as individuals that want these. We tend to let the individuals doing the building off scot-free. But within a dozen houses up from where I live, and I live on the waterfront, there's been some clear felling go on the water side. So you can't see it from the road, you don't know what's going on. And they have massive landscapes down there, into the creek. Nobody knows about it really. Too bad to say so. And so again, it's not really just new developments that we need to be concerned about. It's obviously the sorts of things that we as citizens or our fellow citizens do that also cause problems. I could go on and on.
What you're referring to is this kind of system that we exist in where council managers and planners seem to be responsive to the state government to a degree which is not justified under the Local Government Act. Local Government Act says the governing body is the councillors that you elect, right? And the way the Act is framed is that the councillors sitting as a body make decisions which the General Manager must put into effect in a timely manner. Simple. Majority of councillors making a decision runs the council. Of course, the state government can sack the council, but there is no legal, there's no ministerial directions under section 9.1. There's nothing existing at the moment that says an amalgamated council must harmonise its LEP in a certain way or within a certain time. So you just have to inspire your fellow councillors to understand that this is their choice. Managers tend to like things neat, but what suits local communities is not always neat, right? It needs to be nuanced and it needs to be particularised for people. And that's how it works. One of the best methods of protest I've always found is going to your council meeting. I was a councillor for 12 years up in the Hunter Valley, and I always found it remarkable how the attitude of councillors would change if the gallery was packed with people. It's just remarkable seeing that if people are talking about your community, they will be more respectful if you're actually in the room with them. So I think that's one of the most effective things. Being organised is really good. Having community groups. Cate, have you got ideas?
Yeah, can I just check, is there like an overall united organisation or campaign group that is like Save Pittwater or something, firstly? Okay, number one, right? So get organised, form a new group, launch the group, make it really, don't sweat in meetings about, you know, a group's constitution and all that stuff. You don't have time for that. Just kind of trust each other and form like a loose alliance and have like a name for it and launch it. It's all about kind of building power for both the state government, so the state, like MPs and candidates can see you do it, so do it before the state election. And it's all about thinking as well the way in which to make this a bigger issue for the next government, so they're aware that this is an issue. And of course, remember, we've got local government elections kind of soonish, but next year in September. So we've got to think about it politically. If you haven't got a campaign together like that, you know, a Facebook group, Save Pittwater, a de-amalgamation campaign, you know, if you don't have to harmonise your LEP, that's very interesting. Kind of put together some asks and just go hard on it together and as vocal as you can. And I know that sounds very broad, but the first thing, build power, and the way to build power is network and mobilise, form an alliance, form that group, and get out there and start talking about it. Again, just try not to get too consumed in all the kind of, you know, because people can get very worked up when they start an alliance. But it's all about publicity, it's all about social media and Facebook, it's all about going to the council meetings, making yourself heard, and trying to get yourself in the media as well, and have a big campaign about saving Pittwater. We want to de-amalgamate, we're losing all this precious bushland. Start shooting the videos of the clearing that's happening at that block, the 7 blocks, which is just absolutely horrendous that's happening. Get some photos of it before it goes down, start posting that up, telling the story of what you're losing. So that's, yeah, I do that as soon as you can.
Why don't you move over to Pittwater, Cate? I think we need you.
I just have to say that at the moment you have Pittwater LEP.
Yep.
No one's saying it's unlawful, and there's nothing that I've seen in any regulation, direction or edict from the Minister that says the Pittwater LEP will become unlawful at any point in time. So you can keep your Pittwater LEP if Northern Beaches
Do you
Council...
think so?
I absolutely think so, and I know so. If Pittwater Council decides it wants to keep the Pittwater LEP. The other thing that Northern Beaches Council could do is decide that the Pittwater LEP now applies to Warringah and Manly. It's the left LEP.
How do we beat the planning minister's directive that we have a one harmonised LEP?
Well, there isn't a directive. There's a policy, and it's a different thing. And if you saw the fine print, I know, which was hard to read. The policy is that you don't have to have a single new harmonised LEP. You can just expand one of the LEPs. You can expand the Pittwater LEP, and I think it's a fantastic campaign platform. Pittwater LEP is the one that should apply, right? All the way down to the ferry at Manly. but you're right. In the absence of that campaign win, having the strongest possible local character statement regarding Pittwater is obviously going to put you in the best position. Victoria, Western Australia, Queensland, New South Wales have come under pressure from, I call it the Harvard MBA school, where saying bigger is better, right? In New South Wales, so councils were amalgamated in Victoria and Queensland in particular, also Western Australia. Small councils made into big councils. You get less representation, they become less focused on local communities. The New South Wales government wanted to do the same thing. They partially were successful and partially not. But they forcibly amalgamated Pittwater Council with Warringah and Manly, as you know. And what we're seeing is this kind of managerialism which suits development. It suits streamlining approvals of development applications by having a harmonious LEP where a DA, what you need to do for a DA in Pittwater is exactly the same as what you need to do in Manly. And if this Liberal government had its way in 2013 and 14 with a new Planning Act, They wanted to codify all DAs so that there was no merits assessment of a DA, which the Better Planning Network led a campaign against that and stopped it in the upper house, which is really a really critical reason why the upper house is so important to politics in New South Wales, because minor parties like the Greens can have the balance of power and really intervene in critical issues. If we hadn't have done that in 2014, then the Planning Act would have been gutted. They wanted to take out ecologically sustainable development as a principle of the Planning Act. That was Brad Hazard's contribution to the debate. So it's really important. I apologise about the history, but we've really got to be active and say, we didn't want to amalgamate in the first place, it was forced upon us. And secondly, there's no legal reason why we have to have a harmonised LEP. This is to suit developers. What we should be doing is planning should suit communities, right? People before profit.